Good morning, Red Door. My name is Chris, and this is my wife, Ness, and we are so happy you guys are here with us today, and we just have a few announcements to get the day started.
So this Saturday, we have the prayer canopy, which is an awesome way to cover our city in prayer. It's 24/7 prayer over the entire city. So you'll just sign up for a block of time, and you'll pray with us. And really the prompt will be sent out to you this week, but we're about halfway full this month, but please consider joining us. And all you have to do is pray. You just pick a time and you pray. And we're part of this huge body of believers. And each of us, if we're all praying, imagine the impact that would make over our city that we really love and care about. So prayer is real, it's powerful, it's effective. Let's do it as a church, the prayer canopy. Our next announcement.
The next announcement is the feast. Obviously, things are different this year, and we're not going to do a normal feast like we would. But what we are doing is inviting you guys to still go out and shop so that we can give a glimpse of heaven on earth by helping families have their own Thanksgiving. So what that looks like is Monday, November 23rd, by 6 p.m. you're going to drop off your bag of shop groceries in order to help feed a family and give them an awesome Thanksgiving dinner. And Ness, why don't you share how we can participate?
Well, there's a lot of ways we can help. I mean, honestly, the shopping is one thing, and what you do, we have a list. You'll just follow the list. You'll buy all the good stuff, and then so you can buy groceries. That's one way. You can donate turkey dollars to buy the perishables. We buy the turkeys. We buy all these giant, awesome things. So there's a lot of things that we need to purchase on the day of so that it doesn't sit around, obviously. So you can donate turkey dollars. And the third way is you can serve on the nights of pickup. Well, we're kind of flipping it this year to where they're coming to base camp to get their meals, which is so exciting. So instead of driving to them, they come to us. So you can help serve those baskets out. So those are the three ways. You can shop for groceries, turkey dollars, or serve on the night of pickup.
Cool. Mm-hmm. And we're super excited about that. If you are new, maybe been around for a while or whatever, and you're like, man, I want to get more involved into things like the feast or the prayer canopy or just whatever we do as a community, one way to kind of start that, and we really want to encourage you to think and pray through this, is you could give through Red Door. And that money goes into what we do as a church and goes back out in the community.
The thing is, we're serving our community. This year has been extremely hard for many of us in the community as well, and we can help them. So if you have never given to Red Door, and this has been in your mind, I would really consider praying about that. You can go on the website to look for more information about how to give.
Download the app.
Okay, so those are the things going on this week. If you would just please join us in a time of worship.
Thanks, guys.
Good morning, Red Door. Welcome back. Let's worship together. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. 'Cause I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. Old things have passed away, your love has stayed the same, your constant grace remains the cornerstone. Things that we thought were dead are breathing in life again. You cause your sun to shine on darkest nights. For all that you've done, we will pour out our love. This will be our anthem song. have found their hope. The orphans now have a home. All that was lost has found its place in you. You lift our weary head. You make us strong instead. You took these rags and made us beautiful. For all that you've done, we will pour out our love. This will be our anthem song. Jesus, we love you. Oh, how we love you. You are the one our hearts adore. Oh, Jesus, we love you. Oh, how we love you. You are the one our hearts adore. Our affection, our devotion poured out on the feet of Jesus. Our affection, our devotion poured out on the feet of Jesus. Our affection, our devotion poured out on the feet of Jesus. Our affection, our devotion poured out on the feet of Jesus. We love you. Oh, how we love you. You are the one our hearts adore. Jesus, we love you. Jesus, we love you. Oh, how we love you. You are the one our hearts adore. Our hearts adore. Our hearts adore. Yes. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. Amen. Amen.
Father, you are the creator of all things. Your word says that in the beginning you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Before you brought forth the earth, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. We will sing of your great love forever. We will make your faithfulness known from generation to generation. You sit enthroned forever. Your renown endures through all generations. So God, as we worship who you are, we surrender to you and your ways. We give you our hearts, our gifts, our work, our lives, all that we have and all that we are, we bring to you with open hands, knowing that everything we have comes from you. Father, would you work in us and through us that we would be more like you and that we would make you known. We ask boldly, God, for your peace, your presence, your restoration, your shalom in our families and over our cities. As you restore us, would you give us a vision to bring that restoration to others? Holy Spirit, would you pour out on us and pour out through us to awaken us and awaken this world to the reality of your kingdom? Oh God, we long to see you move. We long to be a part of your work to bring your kingdom to earth as it is in heaven. Amen.
So hey, good morning everyone, and what a week we have had. We have taken a vote to elect the new king of the empire, and as kingdom people, we are called to stand in the gap as a people of prayer, seeking the King of Kings and looking for his wisdom and for his peace and how we should love our neighbors best and how we should begin to pray for the one who will become the next president or king, if you will. Especially at a time like this when, the current Babylon that we are in is in crisis, and it looks like this is probably going to take a while to even sort through and figure out who's going to actually be elected. And guys, in the midst of all of this, God is doing something, isn't he? All of 2020 has been this moment, and it's, I think, an evidence that God is up to something. And we shouldn't miss this moment. We can't let this actually pass. I believe all of this chaos and turmoil is not a sign that God has abandoned us or left us to go somewhere, but that he is near us and we are near his presence and what he's doing. And I believe we need to begin seeing this as a sign of God intimately at work in our nation. Not distant, but he is coming close to us, to our neighbors, and he wants to seek, I think, what would be a holy disruption. And so, every season of renewal comes in the midst of chaos. Every holy disruption leads to some sort of holy eruption where things move and change. And what if all of this, all of 2020, is actually God working to bring futility and strife and frustration to the modern project of the current empire? What if all of this is just God bringing down the modern day Babel and sowing confusion amongst all the people who are coming together to build an empire? And where does that leave us? As we're in a place where the song that opens Ecclesiastes is being sung again. Meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. Where does that put us as kingdom people? I think it puts us in the gap to understand that out of this futility that everybody's feeling and this frustration and this meaninglessness and this chaos, we get to bring the answer that's in Ecclesiastes, that there is a God who is coming and there is a God who is at work. And in the vacuum created by this meaninglessness and this frustration and this chaos, we have a purpose. And if we run around trying to solve all the problems of Babylon, if we run around trying to fix everything, I think we're going to miss the opportunity presented to us as citizens of heaven. The opportunity we have to make an impact, to do what Jesus did in his day, right? Because he didn't come into a season of peace and quiet. He came into a season of chaos and turmoil. Jerusalem in his day was like a powder keg. There are riots and there are uprisings both before him and after him. No less than 12 messianic movements that take place before Jesus and after Jesus. And it is something that everybody is looking for there to be a revolution and a destruction of Rome. After all, it was Jesus who entered into the chaos and the turmoil of the empire. And not to fix all the problems, but to begin planting seeds of a kingdom that would start a revolution and change the entire world. He wasn't coming to provide all the solutions to the current problems of Rome in the day, right? He wasn't coming to fix the problems of poverty in Rome and how we handle all the food distribution in the streets, and he wasn't coming to fix the taxes problem. He wasn't coming to provide a solution. Jesus was coming to provide redemption and nothing less. And I think we as kingdom people need to see and understand that that is what we are invited into. To be people who are bringing about redemption. And we would not find ourselves sucked into lesser things. And so I think in some ways we can say with the song of Christmas, O come, Emmanuel. O bid our sad divisions cease and be yourself our King of peace. But that's what we're longing for. And actually, speaking of Christmas songs, I think let's just start Christmas now. Let's just start that, all right? And I think we can just put up a tree. I believe Nest Cannon already has put up a tree. I think you can just start, baking cookies. I think you decorate that tree. You play Christmas songs, play Feliz Navidad to O come, Emmanuel, and you just light that sucker up. And you're thinking, well, what about Thanksgiving? What about Thanksgiving? It just gets swallowed up into the whole Christmas spirit because we can just start Christmas now and just enjoy it all. It's 2020, y'all. We can do that. I think it would be a good thing. Make some cocoa. Drink some hot chocolate with it. Dip it at your peppermint candy into the hot cocoa. Just enjoy it all. And watch Christmas movies. I mean, gosh, Elf would be a great one to watch right now. And so I think we just enjoy that. But that's not what we're going to talk about. I'm just saying we're starting Christmas at our house now. So listen to Dominic the Christmas Donkey today. But Matthew, that's where we're going. Matthew was a writer of the Gospels, but he was also a tax collector. And this morning, I want to focus in on him as this disciple who wrote this incredible gospel and brought us into perhaps one of the greatest pieces of literature ever written, recording what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. And in fact, this is as we said before, a kingdom manifesto, if you will. And I'm just so looking forward to diving in head first and heart first in the coming year to studying that in full. But today I wanted to talk about this idea that is laid out there by Jesus in this season that we're in of loving your enemy. Or, if you will, loving your political enemy. And so Matthew writes in Matthew chapter 5, this text. You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? So Matthew is recording these words of Jesus of loving our enemies. And as Jesus does this, he's saying, look, I want you to understand, when you love your enemies, you look like your Father. That's who you look like. If you saw what he said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father. As we step into this role of what it means to be the sons and daughters of God, it means to step into this place of loving those who do not agree with us and are on the opposite side of the aisle from us. That we are not going to choose to participate in the conflict that is Babylon, but we are bringing an entire redemption that comes from heaven. And so he says, you love your enemies. And when you do that, you're operating as a son or daughter of God, and you look like your dad. When you do that, because after all, and the example he gives there is, does not God cause the rain to fall on both the just and the unjust? And see, sometimes we think about that like a bad thing. Like, well, why does God make it rain on everybody? Well, they loved rain. Like, they needed rain. They farmed. And so rain was a good thing. And what Matthew is saying here, what Jesus is saying in the Gospel of Matthew, is, look, God is giving rain to both those who are just and those who are unjust. When you love your enemy, you're doing the exact same thing your Father in heaven does. See, I think we at times have this thing where we're like, why doesn't God just zap all the bad people? Why can't it just be where like God rewards the good people and just destroys the bad people? Because he loves them. That's why. When we are complaining about, wishing that God would, reward us for all the good we do and destroy these other people, we're missing the heart of our Father. We're missing what he's about. And Jesus is saying, look, I'm forming a community that is defined by what they do and how they treat others, because you are not supposed to look like everyone else. You're supposed to look like your dad. In fact, not only do you look like your father, you do look different. And so he said, and you got to appreciate this, Matthew, a tax collector, writing this out and going like, yep, that's the way it works. Like, even the tax collectors love the people who love them. And the Gentiles, which is the nation, the non-Jewish people, the non-people of God, like they love people who love them. And what Jesus is saying is, you can't look like everyone else. We can't look like everyone else. We are called to look different. And for Matthew, guys, you got to understand, this was not a theory. This was like a reality. I mean, he was a tax collector. And as a tax collector, he knew what it meant to love those who loved him. But as a disciple, he was going to learn what it meant to love those who didn't love him, who were his enemy. And I think when we come to understand something about Matthew and something that shaped him and made him a disciple, it's going to call us into that same thing as citizens of the kingdom. So, the story of Matthew getting called by Jesus to follow him is in Matthew 9. Jesus comes to the tax collecting booth where Matthew's working, and he says, hey, it's time. You're going to come follow me. And Matthew is like, all right, I'm going to come follow you. And then immediately after that, in Matthew 10, he writes about the 12 disciples that were all gathered up together. And so he gets called, he's in the club, Jesus brings the 12 disciples around him. There's a reason why there's 12. We don't have time to go into that today, but it's a really cool thing. And Matthew gives the list of people, and he buries a detail into this list that we are not supposed to miss. We have to catch. Because it's speaking about what it means to be somebody who loves your enemy and follows Jesus in this mission. And so, Matthew 10, verse 10. And he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. The name of the 12 apostles are these. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Okay, so you got to love that list. It ends with like Judas Iscariot, who betrayed. It's like the obligatory, like, oh yeah, Judas. But do you notice something else about the list? I mean, everybody else was like the son of someone or the brother of someone. But Matthew, he wasn't the son of someone or the brother of someone. He was the tax collector, right? He was the person that all the Jews hated, because the tax collector had aligned themselves with Rome. They were collecting Roman taxes from the Jewish people. And as the Jewish people would pay their taxes, the tax collector would earn their income by taking more money from them. And so Matthew was in this line of business, but the other guy that's in there that's not called, a brother or a son, or then you got the like B-roll disciples who like no one really knows, like Bartholomew and Thaddeus, like those guys just. But the other one that had a detail was Simon the zealot. Now, if Matthew, the tax collector, is like the fancy Roman scarf-wearing, big government, tax-collecting, posh coastal elite with a liberal streak who, partnered with Rome, extorting the Jewish people. Simon the Zealot was essentially the backwoods Galilean, MAGA hat-wearing, Second Amendment, heat-packing, concealed carry, sword-packing conservative. Like, that's who he was. And you're like, there wasn't a Second Amendment back in the day. And I know there wasn't. He would have just created it so he could pack his sword, because that's what zealots did. Zealots were known at that time for their zeal. It's what drove them. There were stories from the Old Testament that spoke of the zeal of Phinehas or the zeal of Elijah. Or in Maccabees, it was the zeal of the Maccabean revolt that drove everything forward. And so this group of people pursued Israel's freedom, and following the law was zeal. And they would stop short of nothing to pursue that. In fact, at this time, when Jesus is on the scene, the zealots were known for assassinating tax collectors or other Jewish people who would not oppose the invasion of Rome upon Israel. These guys were freedom fighters, and they wouldn't hesitate to put anyone down who disagreed with them. And here's what's crazy. In this list that Jesus gives us are a tax collector and a zealot. And I don't think Matthew drops these details in for us to miss. In fact, he's the only one that mentions in this list that there was a tax collector and a zealot. He's putting that there for us to see and know, and saying, like, look at the kinds of people that Jesus draws together. You could not get from any further opposite ends of the spectrum in Israel in that day. I mean, I think that's the point Matthew's making. That when it comes to Jesus, he has a way of drawing every sphere of the spectrum together to pursue the kingdom together. That Jesus would not, as we saw last week, be sucked into the issues of Babylon. But he also had a way of saying, I'm not going to be drawn to these places, but I'm going to draw you to me. And isn't that what's so incredibly unique and incredible of following Jesus? So, why would Jesus call these natural enemies together? And not only that, I think the question we need to ask for right now is, how does it even work? I mean, how do we come together where we love our political enemies? And how do we operate in a world where we do that? And I think it's understanding, Jesus is drawing these men together because that's what he does. And it's what he came to do. I mean, this literally is a preview of what's to come. When Jesus isn't just going to draw Jewish people from the opposite ends of the spectrum together, he's going to draw Jew and Gentile together. He's going to draw heaven and earth together. He is reconciling all of creation back to himself and making this thing that had been ripped apart come back together as one. It's what he does, and it's what he came to do. And so Jesus is bringing together for himself not a group of people who all just like to eat the same kinds of cheese and hang out with the same kind of wine. I mean, this is not the supper club. It's not people drawn together because of a common affinity group, right? I mean, it's not any of that. In fact, it's quite the opposite. One guy, D.A. Carson, he says it this way: ideally, the church itself is not made up of natural friends. It is made up of natural enemies. What binds us together is not common education, common race, common income levels, common politics, common nationality, common accents, common jobs, or anything of the sort. Christians come together not because they form a natural collocation, but because they have been saved by Jesus Christ and owe him a common allegiance. In the light of this common allegiance, in light of the fact that they have all been loved by Jesus himself, they commit themselves to doing what he says, and he commands them to love one another. In this light, they are a band of natural enemies who love one another for Jesus' sake. And that's what Jesus does. He draws people together from all different parts of the spectrum in him. And he finds a way to bring people who would naturally be enemies with one another and brings them together. And so Jesus' disciples were pulled from both the right and the left and pulled into this place of following him. And it's the way Jesus brings these people together that gives us the resources and gives us an understanding of how we actually can love our neighbors. Because for him to step into that place and get people from all sides to come and follow him and be a part of this movement says something about that movement and says something about the diversity of people that he is drawing together for this movement. But how do we actually love our enemies? I mean, how did Simon and Matthew find themselves loving one another and then going out and loving a world and telling them about this Jesus who drew them together? Because we want to love our enemies. I think every one of us loves the ideal of that. I mean, gosh, I think most politicians would just spout that on a stump speech any day of the week. But the reality is we don't love our enemies. We want to. We just can't. Like, why? I mean, it's as though, we know that brushing our teeth is good for us, but we just don't do it. Well, I mean, I do, but maybe you don't. I don't know. But we have all these things that we know that we should do, but we don't do them. And we know we ought to love our enemies, but we don't love our enemies. There's a disconnect between our desire and our reality, between what we say we want and what we actually do. And I believe we all genuinely want to love our enemies. And we want a world where people love their enemies. Who wouldn't want to live in that world? But what happens in real life is hating our enemies, backstabbing our enemies, canceling our enemies, destroying them online or calling them names or yelling at them across picket lines because we can't connect our actual desire to love our enemies with our actual ability to love our enemies. And so there's something that both Matthew and Simon came to know and understand that changed them and changed the world. I mean, literally, it's what brought the gospel to us. See, think of it this way. I think there's a lot of us that would love to give $1 million to help those who are in poverty. I mean, we see things, we're like, oh man, if I had $1 million, I would totally give to that. I would take care of that thing. You have the desire, but as far as I know, there's not like really any millionaires here. And so we don't have the ability. And it's one of those things where there's a disconnect, see, between the desire we have and the ability we have to do something about that. And I think it's to realize that we may want to give somebody $1 million, but if you don't have the ability to do it within you, it doesn't matter. It's not going to get done. So I think it's the way it works here is when we want to love our enemies, but we can't, it's because we don't have the actual ability within us to do it. Why? Why can't we love? And the answer in Scripture and the answer that Jesus came to bring to us is that it's fear. We can't love because of fear. Just look with me at 1 John, and I think this is how we come to understand what brought both Matthew and Simon together and how we move forward. 1 John 4 says, "And so we know and rely on the love God has for us." God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world, we are like Jesus. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. Do you get this? What he's saying is there is no fear in love. None. That these things are, if you will, opposites of one another. Just like there is no cold and heat. There is no fear in love. That the absence of love is fear. And the absence of fear creates love. And what happens is that it says, but perfect love drives out fear. That's the difference. And that's what made the difference for both Matthew and Simon. Is that these were two men whose lives were lived in fear. Matthew's life lived in fear of maybe not having enough. Maybe he lived in fear of not having the right things to wear or the right lifestyle to have, or, feeling like he was missing out on all the things that life had to offer. And so he wasn't going to waste it. So he would join with the Romans against his own people so he could have a finer lifestyle and have nicer things. Simon, fearing that Jerusalem was lost forever, and that this Roman horde that had come to take it over and any compromisers that went with them were destroying the very nation that God had given them and was destroying the life that they were supposed to have as Jewish people. And what both of these men found is that when they were called by Jesus, there was a love that drove out the fear within them. That didn't happen right away. But it happened over time, and ultimately it happened when they understood what Jesus did when he went to the cross. But I'll tell you where it started. It started when Jesus comes to them and says, I want you. Will you come follow me? And will you come be with me? I've come for you. And I love you. And I want you to come be with me and start something that is going to end in a revolution of nothing less than the Messiah coming and bringing salvation to Israel and to the world. And so he invites them into that place with him. And then Jesus goes to the cross for them and for us, saying, listen, I've loved you and I've chosen you and I've come for you, and I am never, ever going to leave you. Was that not the words that he told them? When he was commissioning them out, he said, and remember, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. This is a love that will never fail. It's a love for them that says, I'm not going anywhere. I love you and I've pursued you. And it's that love that drove out their fear, that they realized there's nothing that we will not have when we have Jesus. We have this moment with him. And so John would say in 1 John, so now we know and rely on the love that God has for us. And so this is what we have to understand. Is that why don't we love our enemies? Is that there is fear sitting in our hearts. That person that disagrees with you on something or is on the opposite side of you, in some way there is fear that if they have their way, you won't have yours. Sitting beneath the anger for them and the frustration for them is the fact that they're going to stop you from having something you want. This is not just our political enemies. This is our own homes and our own lives and our marriages. Right? When you're dealing with anger with a spouse, is it not the thing that lies beneath it is fear? Fear that they don't want you. Fear that you've been rejected. Fear that you're not good enough. And if you want that fear to be pushed out, it is receiving and relying on the love that God has for us. This is love. Not that we've loved first, but God first loved us and gave himself for us. And so, guys, here's the difference between the empire and people of the kingdom, is that people of the kingdom are relying on the love of God and just leaning so heavily into that it is driving out the fear that takes residence in our hearts. Are you with me? Are you finding yourself at a place where you are full of fear? Because that's where I think many of us are. It's 2020. And this is an anxiety, fear-inducing season. But listen, The thing that we have to do is concentrate on and meditate on and spend time looking to the love that God has for us and allowing that to drive the fear out of our hearts, because perfect love casts out fear. When you come to lean into, rely on, and listen to, and meditate on, and dwell on, and sit in that love He has for you day by day by day by day, it starts to drive the fear out of your heart the same way it did for Matthew and for Simon as they spent day by day by day with Jesus. And His great love for them drove fear out of their hearts and had a way of unifying and bringing them all together. It is not all of us running around trying to find out how we can love one another and fix everything with each other. It is all of us looking to that great love with which He's loved us. And that then works almost like a tuning fork. That if you tune every piano you possibly can with the same tuning fork, every one of those pianos are naturally in tune with one another. And so He just draws all of us together by tuning us into His love and bringing us into that place and knowing that He will never leave us or forsake us. Now, here's what's interesting, just for some brief brain science. The amygdala is the part of our brain that responds to fear. It's the thing that drives the adrenaline and the cortisone response that we have when that fear thing comes. It's what causes us to get panicked and stressed and full of it. It's like literally what we live in 2020, right? However, we have a natural regulator in our body against that response and that adrenaline and cortisone injection. And that is the neuropeptide oxytocin, sometimes known as the love chemical. It's this thing that is produced in our brain when we have eye contact with another human being or physical touch, especially from someone we love. And that thing of oxytocin is what releases that sense of pleasure and goodness and warmth in our bodies. It's why you actually have a physical response because of the chemical response that goes on. And there's actually evidence that through all of this lockdown and all the stuff with COVID and 2020 is that there's been this oxytocin deprivation that's gone on in our bodies. But when there is a release of oxytocin, it literally drives back the adrenaline and cortisone levels that we are redlining at. So literally, just at a brain science level, what John said 2,000 years ago is true. That perfect love drives out fear, both in our bodies at a chemical level and in our spirits at a full-on human being God level. There is a reality that He is doing that on a day-by-day basis. As you sit in and embrace the love He has for you, then, get this, as that's all pushed out, all that fear is pushed out, it's not filled with nothing, it's filled with the very love of God. And now you have the resources to go and love your enemy and your neighbor. See, the reason we can't love our enemies is because we don't have the love inside of us to be able to do it. We have a desire to, but not the ability to, because we're full of fear rather than full of love. But if you and I begin to dwell on the same love that Matthew and Simon dwelt on, it will drive the fear out of our hearts and replace it with the love of the Father that then flows through us into a world that desperately needs to know that love. Now, I get it. In this time, in this day and age, it's 2020 in the season of COVID. You may feel like I don't have much to offer at all in terms of love. I am full of fear. I understand. But wasn't it Jesus who said this thing starts with just a mustard seed? That this whole kingdom thing that began in a garden and ends in a garden, that He is wanting to plant something in your life that is really, really small. And He places that seed into your heart and into mine, and it grows. And so I don't think it begins with you feeling like you have all the great love. I think it starts with dwelling on that love that God has for you and letting it work its way into your heart and take root. And then something incredible happens as it grows up. But it's so easy for us to get distracted and think it's about something else and forget that we're called to love our enemies. In fact, it's Matthew who writes a story about another planting that occurred that I wanted to end with. It's in Matthew 13. It's called the parable of the wheat and the weeds, and Jesus tells them this parable in verse 24. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. And when the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from? An enemy did this, he replied. The servants asked him, Do you want us to go and pull them up? No, he answered, because while you're pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. So you have this incredible moment where an owner plants his garden, and in the middle of the night, his enemy, apparently this was a thing back in the day, I don't know, like some rogue weed planting that goes on. I mean, in my mind, I'm just imagining somebody like going around with like hundreds and hundreds of those little things, just like rogue seed planting of weeds everywhere and destroying the garden, and like a boss shakedown mob style or something. I don't know how it went down, but I think what's incredible is the question that the servants ask. They say, do you want us to go and pull up the weeds? He's like, no. Guys, I just want you to grow wheat. Don't worry about the weeds. Don't worry about all the stuff that's happening there. Your job is to grow the best wheat possible. And listen, guys, I think that's us, and that's this season, and that's what's going on. That oftentimes we want to look around and we get so concerned with the weeds. And what Jesus is telling us is, listen, I have planted a seed of the kingdom in your heart, and your job is just to grow wheat, grow the best wheat you possibly can. And so that's what we do as a church family. We join together to cultivate this garden and grow the best wheat possible. And we hope as we do so that the love of God that fills our hearts, we then turn to those who are our natural enemies, and we love our enemies and look forward for the day for those weeds to actually be turned into wheat, for those who are dead to be transformed into life, and for this kingdom to erupt in the hearts of every man and woman everywhere. So church, as we end, may you allow this garden to erupt in your life. May you receive the seed of the love of God planted in you, and may that cause you to be someone who does not live in fear, but lives in love, spreading and sharing the love of God to everybody, including your enemies. Be blessed.
Thanks so much for joining today's live stream. We miss being together with you, and we can't wait for a time where we can all gather together again. Have a great day, Red Door.